The gentleman who is there in a t-shirt, in handcuffs and leg cuffs, he should have been wearing uniforms with 4 stripes. This is the captain of our ship. This is the captain of our ship who spent 2 years in jail in Honduras. I will come to the incident a bit later. This is not what a captain of a ship should look like. Next slide, please. As Mr. Emmanuel had mentioned a little bit earlier, during the period of COVID, drug smuggling on board ships has gone up by some 400% globally. And most of the drug smuggling activities on ships starts in ports in Brazil, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, Mexico, and Panama. Santos in Brazil for the last 4 years has been the worst port in the world for drug smuggling on board ships. Drug cartels seem to easily penetrate the port security services, board the ships, hide drugs on board ships, which is extremely easy to do on big ships. The crew have no clue that there are drugs on board. The preferred destination ports are in Western Europe, United States, and Australia. On occasions, they use intermediate ports in Africa like Nigeria. From there on, it's transshipped to the preferred destinations. Smuggling activities are carried out by large cartels. A cartel called the PCC in Sao Paulo, Brazil, which started about 20-odd years ago, has got 40,000 active members globally, including perhaps in Lagos. And they've got 60,000 extra contract workers working for them. They have deep pockets. They're extremely well organized. The intelligence networks are incredible. They know the ship's design and configuration as well as the ship's crew, because they have the intelligence networks to do this. In certain countries, when drugs are discovered on board at destination ports, crew are imprisoned in jail. They live under harsh conditions. Ships are detained, and the families and the crew members have to go through severe physical and mental trauma. In almost every case in such countries, after multiple court hearings, which could last months and years, the crews are finally released and proven innocent. Very seldom do they get criminalized, saying they were guilty. And in that period, sadly, most of their families have suffered for years on end. And this actually destroys careers, destroys family life, destroys them financially, emotionally, and some extreme measures, really. According to the United Nations Office of Drugs and Crime, the USDEA, that is United States Drug Enforcement Administration, Interpol, US Coast Guard, and the Federal Police in Brazil, all of whom I've met in the last 12 months, they're finding it extremely difficult to curtail drug smuggling activities globally. One of these agencies here mentioned that drug smuggling will continue for 100 years or more, as long as there is a demand in countries for receiving the drugs. Most cases, drugs being smuggled on board ships is cocaine. Unfortunately, recently, there have been a few cases of synthetic drugs like methamphetamine, which have also been shipped. Since drug smuggling is classified as a criminal matter, marine insurers do not provide insurance cover for ship owners to cover the ships and crew for such instances. Bigger ship owners like ourselves, when our crews are detained or our ships are detained, we will do whatever it is to defend our crew and get them out and to be proved innocent. But as Mr. Emmanuel correctly pointed out, smaller ship owners could go bankrupt, and the smaller ship owners perhaps do not have the wherewithal to stand legal avenues, so they will release the ship and they may just leave the crew to their own devices to get themselves released, which is extremely difficult for crew to do. Next slide, please. This is just showing you, this slide is compiled by one of our partners called Africa Risk Compliance. This is just showing you the cocaine found on board ships over the last few years. As you can see, from 2019, there's been a dramatic spike in discoveries. This is only the cocaine discovered on board ships. There are plenty of cases which doesn't get discovered. It was either discovered on the ship or it was discovered in the port facility. In ports, rather, not port facility, in the ports. And it was said by some of these federal agencies whom I met, like the UNODC, only 1 in 6 ships gets detected. That means if these are the quantities detected, you multiply that by 6. That means these drugs have actually found the way to the final destinations and nobody's picked it up. The next slide, please. This slide actually shows in different countries the ship-related cases which have been picked up, which have been discovered. Like as you see again, 2023, the left extreme bar in dark blue is from Brazil, predominantly Santos. As you can see, the number of cases in Santos, there were like 87 cases in Santos alone last year. And you multiply that by 6, that's about 500 and something cases, which have probably gone undetected. And 2024 is not lagging too far behind. Predominantly, as I said, Brazil, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, and Argentina. These are the slides I've shown here. Next slide, please. Now, I'm going to be talking initially about the incident that we had in Honduras, just to put perspective to the whole discussion we're having today. This ship in Honduras, one of our own ships, loaded grain in New Orleans in the ADM terminal, which is, ADM are a huge American grain conglomerate, in their terminal for discharge in a port in Honduras. After discharging the grain, our ship was meant to go back to Houston again on ballast. That means ballast means without any cargo on board the ship. Just prior to completion of discharge, through a tip-off, the local drug agency, which is the equivalent of the NDLEA in Nigeria, they raided the ship and they found 19 kilograms of cocaine hidden inside a cargo hold in a space the crew almost never go into, in a ventilated trunking. They took it off, they held the ship back for a day or two, the discharge operations continued. Then they told the captain, you name anybody on the ship. There were 19 crew on the ship. Who you suspect? The officers were all from China, the ratings were from the Philippines. The captain said, I don't suspect anybody because most of our crew have been here for 8 and 10 years, and he himself had been with us for 9 years. He was the 47-year-old Chinese captain from Dalian called Captain Yui Hai. Then they said, Captain, if you don't give me a name, we will arrest you. He said, so be it. So we had got lawyers involved and all right up front, but then there's little they could do. So the captain was arrested. Ship was allowed to sail with the crew in about a couple of days. And the captain was put in prison for 24 months. And the conditions in prison were harsh. He was the only foreigner among 700 local Honduran prisoners. He couldn't speak Spanish. They couldn't speak English. He got dengue fever and he got all sorts of other diseases during that period. I visited him twice, once in June. This happened, by the way, in August 2021. I visited him twice, once in June 2022 and again during the trial in August last year. Following the trial, in August last year over 4 days. There was one single trial. He was released. To make matters worse, when this incident happened, Honduras did not have any diplomatic relations with China. Even though we communicated a lot to the Chinese government, they couldn't do very much because Honduras recognized Taiwan then. But as our luck would have it, China and Honduras established diplomatic relations in March last year. As a result of this, the Chinese government opened an embassy in Honduras, and their officials were exceptionally good. They took a really keen interest in making sure that they participated in everything. And the crew were, and the master was finally released in August following this trial. We had appointed the topmost law firm. Through our U.S. contacts, we had appointed Dentons. Dentons are a big law firm in the U.S. We had appointed them in Honduras. They in turn appointed a very senior lawyer, criminal lawyer, in Honduras as well. But then when the captain got back to China, his wife, who was about similar age as him, 47, 48 years old, the daughter who's about 24, his mother, all of them were simply not the same as he had left them 2 years ago. All of them were mental wrecks. He was a complete mental and a physical wreck. They went through severe depression for almost 8-9 months, till about May this year. Of course, we obviously supported them through the process. And the wife himself and his daughter have come out of the depression, but the mother has gone into a permanent state of depression. The captain, despite having been all his life at sea, he's only 49 now. He said, "That's the end of my sea career. I'm not going back to sea again." Of course, the Honduran authorities, there was a lot of international pressure on them, put through us. The IMO, International Maritime Organization in London, the International Labour Organization in Geneva, International Chamber of Shipping in London. Various parties put pressure on them, but nonetheless, nothing happened. This incident, anyway, it cost us about $3 million US in various costs and a loss of a good captain because he's not returning back to sea. He'd been with us for some 9 odd years. So, I can't even explain to you what the prison conditions were like. They were sort of really, really torturous. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Yeah, just the previous slide, the previous one. Yep, that's good. All right. Most likely what has happened is since the drug cartels had information that a ship was going back to the United States after Honduras, they've taken that opportunity to hide the drugs in the cargo holds. When they found the drugs through the tip-off, the cartels were nowhere to be found. We don't even know who put the drugs. Instead, our captain got stuck in jail for 2 years. But since this incident happened, since there was so much pressure from international organizations in Honduras, there have been several other cases of drugs being found on board in Honduran ports. But the Honduran authorities have taken a completely different stance since then. They've stopped detaining ships and crews. They know the involvement of cartels. They do a quick investigation, take away the drugs, let the ship continue its operations, don't arrest crews. At least that's the way it should be. That's the way most countries deal with it. The Hondurans have wisened up, and they're doing the same now, thankfully. Just to put some perspective in what happened here, when this incident happened, the president of Honduras was a gentleman called Juan Orlando Hernandez in August 21. He finished his 8-year term in December 2022. And there was a new president elected, December 21 rather, and a new president, Castro, she's a lady. She got elected, she took office in 2022, January. In March 2023, last year, Hernandez, was it 22 maybe, in March 2022, Hernandez was extradited to the US to stand trial. In June this year, Hernandez has been convicted by the US Department of Justice to 45 years in prison. His younger brother is already serving a life sentence in an American prison. So this is a country where the president of a country gets put in prison for 45 years, and his brother's serving a life sentence. And then our captain gets nailed for 2 years in jail. There's somehow the logic doesn't stack up. Next slide, please. What you're seeing here is kind of the prison the captain was in. I could not take photographs within the prison, but these are photographs are collected. This is what the prison looks like. These are the sort of people he was with. These are the people, when I went into the prison cell to see the captain, this is what I saw, guys like this, most of them without t-shirts, with, all sorts of tattoos on the faces, the bodies, and there were all sorts of earrings all over the place and all sorts of things, So, and of course, that was the height of COVID. None of them are wearing a mask. So, these are conditions sometimes seafarers are put through. As the president of NIMASA and the president of the Masters Mariners Association here mentioned before me, the realities of being a seafarer and working ashore is different. And when you're subjected to this type of torture, it takes a different dimension altogether. Next slide, please. It is not just Honduras which has these problems. There have been multiple countries, but I'm just picking up examples where we might have been touched or whatever. From May 2019, around in 2019 toward the latter half of the year, there were multiple drug smuggling detentions in 2 ports in Mexico, Altamira and Ensenada. And majority of the ships which came in and got detained were originating from Colombia. The drugs in every case was cocaine. There were several container ships and several bulk carriers. But 3 ships got detained for a period of 2.5 years each. 2.5 years each, they were detained in port. That means, can you imagine the commercial losses for that ship owner? Was like $15-17 million, And in one instance, the Polish captain was detained in prison in Mexico for 20 months. He was not a Polish captain of ours, but he was a Polish captain detained for 20 months. And finally released, and he was proved innocent. So it is not just Honduras which does this. And these ships, again, they've found varying quantities of cocaine hidden by the cartels. And not in one instance were the crew implicated of being involved. Every instance, the crew were innocent. But Mexico, they did not detain the crews for long periods of time, except for the one captain who was detained for the 2 years. The rest of the crews were allowed to get off the ship immediately. But 3 ships were detained for 2.5 years each, which is absolute torture again. But since then, the Mexican authorities have wisened up. There have been several cases in the last 2 months in Mexico on ships originating from Peru and Colombia where they found drugs in Mexican ports, on board, on deck, and under deck in the sea chest or underwater. The Mexican authorities, having been armed with the experience of 3 years ago or 5 years ago, are now not detaining ships and detaining crews. They take the drugs off. They know it is the cartels doing this, and they let the ship sail. So here we've got 2 cases. Honduras as a country and Mexico as a country that dealt with these detentions in one way back in 21 and 2019. They wisened up, and now they're not detaining ships. They're dealing with it in a completely different way, the way it should be dealt with today. Next slide, please. Incidents in Nigeria. From February 21 till July 24, 4 bulk carriers, all of them carrying sugar, from Santos in Brazil to Lagos in Nigeria, were found having drugs of various quantities from 18 kilograms to 43 kilograms. These again were found through tip-offs, and the NDLA arrested each of these ships. During the course of the investigations, each of these 4 ships were held for between 4 to 6 months and allowed to sail after posting. Ships were allowed to sail after posting bonds ranging from $2 million US dollars to $5 million US dollars. In each ship, I mean, these bonds, people didn't even have to post in Mexico or in Honduras, by the way. On each ship, typically ships have got about 20 crew members, okay? On each ship, about half the crew members were detained after the ship sailed. That means 10 crew members per ship were detained. And they were detained in Nigeria for periods of approximately about 20 to 24 months. In fact, one ship's crew is still here for more than 3 years. They're still around. Approximately 3 years, they're still here. 10 Thai crew members. So to prevent them from staying in jail and getting them out in a hotel facility, the ship owners had to pay $40,000 per crew member. That's $400,000 to put them in a hotel facility. Then, of course, the crew salaries are continuing to be paid by the owners throughout the detention, plus the hotel costs, plus the legal costs in Nigeria, plus the legal costs in maybe wherever the main insurers sit, whether it's in Norway or the United States or Europe or UK, those costs. So typically for a ship owner, where a ship has been detained for 4 to 6 months, and the crews have been detained for approximately 2 years, their cost is close to $5 million in that alone. That's not even including the $400,000 which has been paid in bail to get them out of jail, nor the $5 million bond which was paid to get them to sail. So that's quite rightly pointed out earlier by Mr. Emmanuel, it's ranges between 25 to 40% of the value of a ship. And ship owners, just by virtue of owning a ship, is not a rich guy. It takes years and years and years. 2013 to 2020, most bulk carrier owners made losses every single year. Lots of small ship owners went bankrupt. The bigger guys managed to sustain themselves and made some money in 21 and 22. So this is extremely impactful. You know, apart from the cost, it's also the cost of the crews, their mental health, their physical health, the families, the loss of jobs, the knock-on effect it creates for various things. You know, it's just, you can keep going on. Next slide, please. As always, the mental and physical scars that leaves on crew members and the families is immense. Careers are destroyed, and such families go into deep recession, financial difficulties, emotional difficulties. And I've already mentioned to you, it costs ship owners lots and lots and lots of money to get these ships and crews out. Also, when cases like this happens, it affects ship owners. They don't trade there anymore. Our ships, when we were in Honduras, when we had the problem in Honduras, we stopped trading to Honduras for 2 years. Completely. Well, Honduras is not an important destination for us. United States, China, Nigeria, these are important destinations. Europe. We completely stopped trading to Honduras. Of these 4 ships affected, which I just mentioned, Nigeria, one of them was us. We have stopped trading here, including the fact that it was an important trading destination for us. We have stopped trading the sugar cargo. We told our French charterers, we're not going to come back here because we had contracts with our French charterers to carry the sugar from Brazil to here. We said we're not trading till such time our crews are not released from here. So we stopped. And we will not trade till it happens. Big roll-on, roll-off carriers, they've completely stopped trading to Nigeria and Senegal and Ghana from South American countries because they have been impacted by various problems. So not only it's crews' emotional distress and everything, it's financial distress, trading distress. It's a knock-on effect is severe. You must understand, next slide, please. You know, security challenges faced on ships is immense. Crew members on ships are trained to be navigators, trained to maintain the engine room, trained to load cargo and trade the cargo from one country to the other. The crew members on ships are not security specialists. The security is the responsibility of the port. Ever since 9/11, when the ISPS regulations came in, I mean, you can go to the New Orleans terminal or the Houston terminal or any of these terminals in the US. The security protocols are incredible. The amount of technology invested there. Most European terminals, Japanese terminals, terminals in Hong Kong. I lived there. To get to the container terminals, I've got to go through all sorts of protocols. But in many of the South American countries, they're extremely porous and the security is absolutely useless. So when these problems happen, ship's crew have multiple tasks on board ships. And these multiple tasks involve security happens to be one of the tasks in the recent years, but they have many other tasks to do. 90% of the cargoes which are transported, the tables, the chairs, whatever we are sitting on here, all this is transported by ships. You need seafarers to do all this. During COVID, everything stopped in the world, but shipping still continued because trade had to continue. Each crew member, please understand, each crew member has to spend about a contract of 8 to 10 months on board ships. They're away from their loved ones and families. Life is hard as it is without the additional problems of drugs being thrown in. They trade under very harsh sea conditions. The sea is not a friendly place, best of times. But then the conditions they operate in, the high seas, the Bering Sea or the North Atlantic, the conditions are even worse. It's not an attractive career at the best of times, but then they still go there because it's a profession and you still have to trade globally. Every port you go to load and discharge cargoes, multiple people come on board ships. You have stevedores, you got agents, you got immigration, customs, repair companies, all sorts of people coming on board ships. So at one time, at any given time in a port call of 3 days, you could have about 250 people coming up and down the ship. And we got only 19 to 20 crew members performing other tasks plus doing the security tasks. To put things in perspective, typically a bulk carrier of say 45,000 to 50,000 deadweight, the length of that ship is about 1.5 times bigger than a football field or a soccer field, whatever you call it here. The width of the ship is 60% of a soccer field. The height of a ship is equal to a 16-storied building which is here. What this means, that such a ship, like the typical ships we have, is higher than, if you put a building flat, the ship is longer than the Nicom House in Lagos, which is supposed to be one of the biggest buildings here. And its cubic capacity of the ship is bigger than Ikeja Mall, which is supposed to be one of their biggest malls here. And you got 20 crew members doing their own jobs, plus trying to prevent illicit drugs coming on board. Next slide, please. So, under these conditions explained, when the drug cartels are so desperate to get the drugs on board the ships, what chance have crew members in places like Brazil and Colombia or Peru or some of these countries where it's smuggled of preventing these cartels? They can, in these circumstances, is it fair? I ask, is it fair for the crews to be put through these sort of things? I don't think so. And I think most of you sitting here will probably agree with me. If in a building like the Nicom House or Ikeja Mall, a consignment of 20 kilograms of drugs, 20 kilograms is nothing. It's a little Adidas bag, that's it. It's hidden somewhere behind a paneling. What's going to happen? Is everybody in the mall at that time, or anybody in the mall or the Nicom House arrested? Or the management company of the building arrested? Yes, you have CCTV cameras, but there are ways to get around it and hide. Similarly, ships are much bigger than aeroplanes. If they find drugs in a cargo hold of an aeroplane, how many times have you heard the pilot and the air hostesses and the air crews and the planes being detained for 2 years? I have not. Maybe you have, but I have not. Then why on earth do seafarers have to be put through a different set of rules when 90% of the world trade depends on them? Is it fair? How many of you sitting in this room based on what I've just told you, would like your brothers and your sisters and your children taking seafaring as a career tomorrow? Not many. Next slide, please. I would like to explain how the local authorities in countries which the drugs are largely shipped out to deal with the drugs when they are found. These countries, destination countries I mentioned before, is the United States, Europe, Australia. They are the premier destinations for where the drugs are bound for. When they find drugs on board the ships, the same thing happens in Brazil. Brazil is a drug exporting country, but then sometimes the federal police are able to intercept and through their spot inspections, and they find the drugs before the ship sails. What happens is that the federal authorities in these countries, they know where the drugs are coming from. They know the cartels are involved. So they remove the drugs from the ship, carry out a quick investigation, let the ship carry on its normal business, and let the ship and crew sail without putting on multi-million-dollar bonds. And they take the drugs off and it's life as usual. Rotterdam, Antwerp, Flushing, these ports in Belgium and Holland, if they start stopping every ship like they did in Honduras and they do in Lagos, the ports of Rotterdam and Honduras, Flushing will be completely congested. They'll close down because business has to move on. You got to realize the cartels are involved here, not ship's crew. So it's got to be a more methodical approach in how you deal with these cases. Recognizing that drug smuggling was such a huge issue in Brazil, and by the way, all these ships which have come and been arrested in Nigeria, all originated in Santos in Brazil. Recognizing that such a problem exists in Brazil, the president of Brazil, President Lula, last year in October, he issued a directive called the Guarantee of Law and Order, GLO, for a period of 7-8 months, lasting from the beginning of November last year till the end of June this year, where he deployed about 2,000 extra personnel, military, navy, and customs personnel to help the federal police to combat the drug menace. Yes, they did a lot of good work, and it didn't reduce, but they did a lot of detection. They managed, like I said, 1 in 6 cases get detected. Probably 3 in 6 cases were being detected before shipment. But unfortunately, it cost so much. End of June, the president suspended the GLO, and he said, we can't afford it anymore. Okay. There was a big drug smuggling seminar in January this year, exactly same subject, in the United States Coast Guard base in Galveston, Houston area. It was co-sponsored by BIMCO and the US Coast Guard. So I was invited to be one of the panel members there. And there were numerous international organizations who attended the seminar. Like you had people from the UNODC, obviously the US Coast Guard, BIMCO, the World Shipping Council, Interpol, Interport Police, British Home Office, who deal with security, the United States DEA, and drug enforcement agencies from Colombia, Ecuador, and Mexico. And the whole subject was drug smuggling and the unfair criminalization of seafarers. And throughout that, and then the condensed paper of that seminar was then sent to the IMO, to a Fair Practices Commission, to come up with some regulatory documents in the course of 2025, 2026. So the world at large realizes that it is a problem and dealing with it in a sensible manner, even Honduras and Mexico. In my opinion, in my humble opinion, if I may add, I would seriously think that the same things should start happening here too. I would suggest the NDLEA has a good look at these cases. They realize the cartels are the ones involved, and they start dealing with ships and crews the same way as countries like other countries I just mentioned. Carry out a very quick investigation, get the drugs off the ship, let the ship sail, carry on its business. And because in all these cases so far, in 2 of the ships have come and gone, the cases are finished, the crews were proved innocent, and the crews were released after 2 years. To not have to go through this again and again in future, NDLEA should seriously think of dealing with things in a different manner. I mean, there are companies like us. We own 120 ships. We operate 200 more. We're listed in Hong Kong. We have offices globally. We take this very seriously. And this was something which was not that prevalent pre-COVID, but post-COVID, it's taken a new life altogether. So we have put on a lot of additional activity in various ports we call to. Yeah, next slide. Yeah, that's right. That's the correct slide. Yeah. So what we as a company have done, last year alone cost us $5.3 million in various efforts. This year it's going to cost us close to $7 million in various security efforts globally. Of course, we have increased, that goes without saying, we increased the crew awareness to this problem. We lock and seal every space not being used in ports. When I say ports, it means high-risk ports. We don't do all of this in the United States or Japan or Korea. This is in high-risk ports. We have CCTV cameras fitted around, permanent ones fitted, but in countries in ports where we can hire CCTV cameras, we hire additional CCTV cameras, and we put a monitoring team on board the bridge to monitor it 24/7, show-based people, trusted security providers. We also, in some ports, at great expense, especially in Santos, deployed a patrol boat on the offshore side. That means we are, say, loading on the starboard side, we got a patrol boat patrolling 24/7 on the port side throughout the port stay, and you can imagine what that costs us to just monitor us throughout the stay. We use dogs to search the ship before we sail. We carried an underwater diving inspection before we sail, because cartels not only put drugs on top where visible spaces, they even bring divers and put it in the sea chest or torpedoes along the bilge keel or the bow thruster spacing or the rudder trunking. They've got multiple places to hide it. We are supplying drones to our ships to carry out underwater drones for the ship's crew to carry out underwater inspections in some ports. It's not easy to use. It's cumbersome. It takes a long time. A lot of our crews are taking a long time to train them. We have now, like you have security gates, we have put security gates in our gangways on many of our ships, where everybody from ashore has to put his fingerprint, and he will be automatically recognized, and his fingerprint plus his passports there, passports or boarding passes. So we got a log of everybody who's coming and leaving a ship. And recently we've been cooperating with a company in China. We're putting some artificial intelligence on the offshore side, where any movements is detected and conveyed back to our office in Hong Kong, plus the ship's crew. Very, very quickly, before I wrap up, I would like to just touch very quickly on what are the commonly used drug smuggling techniques. Diving method. Divers come under the water and stick drugs on board the ship, which is very common in ports in Brazil, in Peru, in Colombia. It's very, very common. Mexico. Port official method. There are lots of port officials that come, and somebody might sneak in something, and which has gone undetected, and they put these drugs on board the ship. And offshore, sometimes it's offshore boats. Speedboats come at dark when it's completely unlit at night, and they come and stick the drugs on board the ship. Sometimes stevedores on board haul it up and hide it. Next slide, please. Yeah, this is a ship, typical ship. So it just goes to show you the various areas. Number one is hiding drugs inside the cargo hold. Number two is hiding inside the accommodation somewhere. Number three is inside the tanks, not ballast tanks so much. It's like ventilator spacing and stuff. Number four is the torpedoes, which I was talking about, underwater again. Number five, again, it mixed with the cargo. Number six is in engine room and steering gear compartments. Next slide, please. This, by the way, all these three cases, these ships are all not owned. Some were owned, some were chartered. But this is all in Brazil, in Santos. The drugs were discovered before we sailed. It's happened in the last 24 months. In one ship, with the ship was at anchorage for a month. There were cleaning gangs cleaning the cargo holds. So somehow somebody has gone and sneaked into the gymnasium and stuck drugs behind the panel. And when we were doing this canine dog search, the dog sniffed it out, and we were able to retrieve that out. There was 337 kilograms of cocaine hidden there, bound from Santos to Break in Germany. The other two cases, again in Santos, one was in this engine room sea chest. They found drugs hidden behind the grating. The photo on the left, the photo on the right is the torpedo filled with drugs inside the torpedo, about 80 odd kilograms. But these were all removed by the federal police before we sailed. Next slide, please. This photograph on the top is inside a crane mast house, sneaked in under the gratings. The last one, they've mixed the drugs with the cargo. They mixed the drugs with the cargo. You can see bulk cargo, and the yellow stuff there is the drugs, slabs of drugs. Each one is a brick containing a kilogram of drugs. This was discovered in Spain. Anyways, I hope I've covered a broad range of topics covering drugs. The main thing is not on what has happened, what we should do to prevent it happening again. And if it does happen again, what must we do logically to make sure the ships and crews are treated more humanely? Business must continue unless there is an absolutely compelling evidence that the NDLEA or the customs, whoever has, that a particular crew member is involved. We will more than happily get this guy off the ship, and we ourselves will cooperate with authorities, take him off, deal with him. But these cases are very, very few and far between. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the hearing.
Wow, so much said. Thank you. Thank you so, so much. Can we put our hands together again for our lead speaker, Mr. Suresh? It strikes differently when you hear from an experienced person, when you hear from someone who gives you a first-hand narrative of what goes on. And we sincerely hope that at the end of the day, we're able to reach a resolution on how to move forward within the Nigerian context, especially because this year alone, I'm aware that, for example, the Tinkan Island port has confiscated over 7,000 kilograms of cocaine. How did it get into our port? How did it get on board those ships? And well, it's up to the panelists and it's up to everyone here. I see that we have representatives from whether it's the anti-drug side or anti-human trafficking side. And it's on us as a nation, as ship owners, because from the narrative of Mr. Suresh, you see that a lot of responsibility falls on the ship owners. And I must say, kudos to what you're doing at Pacific Basin Shipping Limited. And thank you for role modeling how it should be done. Let's put our hands together again for them.
Going through the topic before us today is very timely. And when you listen to the keynote address, you discover that it's something that is very emotional that we need to really pay attention to. As our keynote speaker did mention, when a ship is in the port, you discover that there are a lot of people that go in and come out. And during such a process, there's a tendency that drugs and similar substances may get introduced to such a vessel. I just want to ask a question. I don't know who is going to answer the question among the panelists. When drugs are found on board a vessel by ship's crew, for instance, to whom should they report such incidents to? And in this case, if such a report is made, is there any penalty against the ship or crew because they have reported a case not perpetrated by them? If there is a penalty, how would the ship crew be encouraged to report such cases? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I do think we should take the response to that question so that as we get the contributions, we just take note of them. But where it's a question, we can immediately just take the response. So I would ask for the head NDLEA still.
Thank you.
Ma'am.
That is what we call collaboration. If any drugs is found on board and probably reported to the captain, on berthing, NDLA is on ground at the port. And that can immediately be reported because there's more to be investigated about such. So the crew member has given a relevant information. They have assisted us. So all we need to do is to just investigate further to know the source of how it got there and then to look at the different links. I don't think there's any penalty when they report to us. It is when we find it and then we start investigating and then we start looking at who is who was where we found it. Thank you.
All right, thank you, ma'am. But may I also ask you, Commander, ma'am, Director, ma'am, may I also ask you that who bears the brunt really at the end of the day? Now, for a seafarer or for a member of crew to report, this, and maybe within the mix, you have a syndicate, you have someone who is a part of the broader chain, is there an anonymous chain, where they can pass this information without being recognized? Or is the NDLA beginning to look at something like that for the industry? Because at the end of the day, you do not even know if your captain is in on the deal. You don't know if the next person beside you is in on the deal. You just want to be safe. So how do they go about it such that they can bear that brunt?
I think we have a line. Soraj, can you help me with that line? We have a phone number that can be called. We will get that number to the organizers.
Ma'am, that's not the kind of secrecy we want in this, because even those numbers are hacked. The system on many organizations, they see through your emails, they see through organizations, see through staff emails, they see through staff phone conversations, so it has to be a very private channel that safeguards the seafarer. The seafarer must know that except a situation where there is a hacking system that is beyond what we have intact, then they cannot be noticed.
That was why we recommended training. Because when the training starts and they start training the captain and the crew members, I asked the question if they had a CSO on board, a chief security officer. If there's a CSO on board, then the CSO is supposed to conduct an investigation. But supposing the CSO is even involved in the link.
So that's the thing.
Yeah, so through the training, the collaboration, the different trainings that we have, they will be able to have them to be able to communicate in such a way on the vessel. That's if something is found, it's just like having a first aid. What is the first aid? Like if somebody is unconscious now, anybody could give a first aid. We should be able to have such on a vessel, something like a first aid in terms of the investigation.
So at the end of the day,
they can share the intelligence and then we come into the investigation.
So obvious. Okay, let's have Captain.
If drugs are found on ship, assuming it is at sea, all right? The ship has sailed from Santos, Brazil to Lagos. And we conduct pre-departure inspections, as I said, with dogs and underwater inspections. Thereafter, we have a 24-hour search, 48-hour search, and a 72-hour search carried out with the crew. Despite all of that, sometimes something may be missed. But eventually on the passage, 14-day passage from Santos to Lagos, if for whatever reason some crew find out the drugs, the protocol typically is, first and foremost, the master of the ship is the first person to be informed.
Okay.
Master of the ship is very seldom the CSO. The CSO of the ship invariably is the chief officer. That's the next in line. So the master of the ship, at least in our company, and I think it's in most companies, the first thing he does, he will contact the DPA, our designated person ashore, over the telephone. He will call him over the telephone and say, look, this is what's happened, regardless of day or night, whatever time it is. The DPA then, what they will do, get involved. The DPA will pass it on to senior management in our office, and that's a crisis management team. It's like a crisis, basically. That then we inform the flag state in Hong Kong, if it's a Hong Kong registered ship. We'll inform our P&I club. Invariably, most of our P&I clubs sit either Norway or they sit in London or UK. So we'll inform them, seek guidance from them. They in turn will seek guidance from local correspondents in Nigeria. They in turn will take guidance from local lawyers who are experienced in these cases. And thereafter we'll be guided. And then through the local channels, through local agents, through local lawyers, NDLEA get informed. All right? It is never that a ship's master or a crew member will directly contact NDLEA. They will go through the protocol. It'll invariably be through the chain of events when the NDLEA finds out.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Captain. All right, let's have Craig. President, over to you.
Thank you very much. I actually didn't want to speak during this session, but I was encouraged to speak after hearing this question, which reminds me of the exact reason why we facilitated this particular program, because we saw the gap. The maritime industry is very peculiar. And as Captain Suresh has outlined just now in his response, is unless the NDLEA understand the processes, they will continue to work hard and hard and hard and will not get the support. As a ship captain, I will not report to local authorities anything I find on my vessel first. There is a standard SOP, operating procedure, that govern what I do on the vessel. And as he has rightly said, the first point of contact is the designated person ashore. Now, if there are other issues, let us also remember that the vessel is flying under the laws of a different country. And while that vessel is outside his own country in another jurisdiction, the industry plays that responsibility to ensure that the ship is protected by those laws on the Maritime Administration through, I think, some of them, the port state control measures. That is the Abuja MOU in some cases. So unless there is a collaboration between NDLEA, the Maritime Administration, to come up with a standard operating procedure for reporting, which the industry will accept, it will not encourage a ship captain to just risk and just report outside what he already has. But if we come to understand how things operate, we can now find a working solution that will say, okay, this is how reporting can be achieved. Because the way it is now, NDLEA will not be satisfied with everyone getting the information and while they are the last to get. Because at that time, vital information may have been lost. It will compromise their investigation. For you to place yourself first in the line, you must come into the industry and let us have a working document that will support your good work.
Thank you very much, sir. Yes, let's hear.
Move on to Barrister Marianne. So delayed judgment has resulted in prolonged detention of seafarers and vessels. Is there an opportunity to improve the efficiency of the judicial process when it comes to detention and passing judgment on suspected cases of drug smuggling or trafficking to promote maritime trade, since we don't want to spend too much time in port?
Thank you very much, Connie. And a very big thank you to the organizers as well. I appreciate the privilege of being on the panel. Now to your question, I think your question is in a sense broad, because there are a number of other things to be addressed in the question. So first off, are there laws regarding drug trafficking and regarding the prosecution and adjudication? And then why is there a delay? I acknowledge and I agree with Captain in his brilliant presentation, how he walked us through the effect of delay and how that affects the economy of every country. So absolutely, there is a delay, but a fundamental question is, why is there an existing delay and what can be done? So if we start us with, what are the laws on ground? There are national laws on ground, and chief of which is the NDLEA Act, so the National Drug Law Enforcement Agency Act. And it establishes the NDLEA and gives them the responsibility of enforcing drug laws in Nigeria. So the processing, the manufacturing, the trafficking, the use, transportation of hard drugs, right, or drugs generally, as we've been using here, and gives them the power as well to supervise the arrest and investigation of the same. Now, regionally, we also have laws that guide drug trafficking, the prosecution and adjudication of this in the African continent. So, the African Union has the African Charter on Maritime Security and Safety and Development, which is, largely known as the Lome Charter. Now, this charter seeks regional cooperation, right? Because all hands have to be on deck. It's a multifaceted problem. And so it seeks cooperation and coordination amongst African states. And then internationally as well, we have several conventions from the United Nations, and I think top of which is the United Nations Convention against illicit traffic in narcotic drug and psychotropic substances, right? So we see that at different stages, there is the goal to fight this big problem, which is drug trafficking. Now, why is there a delay in judiciary with the adjudication of, shipping, maritime matters, or, crews and ships and vessels caught with drugs on board? First of all, some delays are inevitable. So, for instance, when I say some delays are inevitable, like language barriers. So, we know that maritime is a very international trade. And so on a crew, you could have all of them being Portuguese, all of them being French speaking, all of them being Spanish speaking, right? So sometimes it would take a while, to figure that out and communicate with one another. But then coming from a legal perspective, the dockets of the court are full. And it's not just in Nigeria. This is even in UK as well. Before, adjudication in UK used to be very fast, but now from the High Court to Supreme Court, it will take about 2 years in UK. In Nigeria, maybe about 10 years. So we recognize that that is an existing, it may take 10 years or more, so that's an existing problem. The courts have, especially in Federal High Court, they have so much on their plate, right? And so that's part of the reason why it would take as much time. Thirdly or fourthly, Section 20 of the NDLEA Act, it prescribes the punishment of life imprisonment for anyone that engages in the production, the manufacturing, the transportation, or importation of drug. So now we recognize that for any and every crime with that gravity of punishment, it's important that sufficient investigation is carried out before judgment is made. Right. So, so I think another reason for delay sometimes would be the investigation required to this. It's important that there is adequate investigation, there's adequate hearing. And I know that every ship owner, every stakeholder bearing in mind the consequence as well. So Section 32 of the NDLEA Act as well says there's a punishment of forfeiture, right? And I mean, it gives requirements for the forfeiture of a vessel. But with such a severe punishment, it's important that adequate investigation is carried out. Or can these investigations be carried out faster? Absolutely. Can judgments be meted faster? Absolutely. So what can be done? What can be done for, to increase the speed of for expedient prosecution, expedient trial, and judgment? Because, I mean, every day that there's delayed judgment, it strengthens the chains of this crime. And so efficient judgment is important to break these chains. The first thing I think would be, a pathway towards expedient judgment would be granting accelerated or expedited hearing towards detained crewmen or vessels. We know that 90% of world trade is via the shipping industry. And so there's a significant connection between judicial process and economic progress. And so to this effect, if we regard the arrest of crewmen, seafarers, right, with the same urgency and importance with which we give maritime claims, that may be a way to expedite judgment. So a case can really and truly be made for, cases of drug trafficking on a vessel that should be treated as maritime claims, right? And, just delving slightly deeper into that, the Admiralty Jurisdiction Procedure Rules 2023 provides the creation of Admiralty Jurisdiction of the Federal High Court. Now, this means that there's specific judges to adjudicate over maritime cases, right? And so this means that if drug trafficking on a vessel is a criminal offense under the Admiralty Jurisdiction Act, it would be regarded as a maritime claim. Now, specialized courts as such can address that. So perhaps this is something we can look at, with the regulations to expedite the prosecution, the trial, and the judgment of seafarers. Another perhaps solution to this really, which Captain touched on in his presentation, is the access to bond, letters of indemnity or security from P&I clubs or banks, right? So, we agree that spending 2 years waiting for judgment, waiting for trial and all of that, it's a long time. It's money, it's financially expensive, mentally expensive, fiscally expensive. So it should be, perhaps it's something we should really and truly explore, where bonds can be posted, where security can be gotten, where letters of indemnity from P&I clubs can be given, and so the vessel can carry out, its trade and continue making money while investigations carry on. And then when the seafarers are needed, to testify in court or for a trial or whatever the case may be, they may be recalled. Thirdly, another way to perhaps expedite judgment would be training and capacity building. Now, there currently is maritime seminar for judges where judges are, enlightened and, several maritime topics are discussed. But it's important now that we're shining light on human trafficking, drugs trafficking, smuggling. It's important that topics like these are discussed at such seminars for judges. So judges also recognize that, maritime trade, as Connie said, time is money. And so such matters are adjudicated on time. So they're enlightened about the complexities and the intricacies of this matter. Another way, that generally adjudication in Nigeria could be faster would be the use of technology. I mean, the world is evolving. We know that technology makes things faster and perhaps smarter. So the use of digital case management in our courts, I think we've been crying a river about this, to be honest. But the use of technology like that, virtual court hearings, which it's currently in play, but with implementing such technology, it can facilitate or expedite resolving or addressing drug trafficking cases, especially with crewmen on ground. And then I think conferences like this as well is another step towards the solution. You'd agree with me that having stakeholders in the room and the general knowledge that we're sharing, we're hearing about human trafficking, we're hearing from NDLEA's perspective, conferences like this enlighten the different stakeholders, right, of the importance and the severity of drug trafficking and the economic loss as well. And I think finally would be funds. You know, we know that in fact, I like to believe that for NDLEA, for instance, if they were giving more funds to train more staff in expediting investigation, because you need investigation to prosecute, you know, if such funds or, you know, such trainings were available to them, certain things would be expedited. So those are my thoughts on expediting judicial procedures.
Thank you very much, Marianne. And it's very clear that the legal framework is quite robust. However, I think when you talked about the language barrier, I said, come to think of it, all these unemployment issues in Nigeria, maybe people picking up translators as a career, it's an opportunity. And that would also help judgment also. You talked about imprisonment as the punishment, life imprisonment. So please, seafarers sitting in the room, and if you have seafarer friends, please tell them, if you're caught, any drug-related offense, life imprisonment. So please, let's also be the frontline barriers as seafarers to deter drug smuggling. And you talked about accelerated hearing, specialized courts, seminar for judges. President, please take note. We need to be in that room next time it's happening. So thank you very much, Marianne. And I think I'll go straight to NDLEA, since you have laid down the foundation for the NDLEA Act. So it's only appropriate that we take NDLEA next. So, Madam, the question to you is, what are the challenges faced by NDLEA in carrying out a swift investigation within a day to determine the ship's or crew's culpability, to avoid keeping the ships at berth and causing losses to the terminal, ships, and crew suffering?
Thank you very much. Permit me to bring the greetings of the General, Brigadier General Buba Marwa, retired. He did not send only me to be here. I'm here with very senior officers from the Tinkan Port, Apapa Port. Even the General's own protocol officer is seated here also. And I have my deputy with me. And now to the question. Just imagine the size of the ship. That's how complicated the investigation is. Like at the airport, Captain mentioned about why is it so easy at the airport, and then for the ships it's not easy. Airport has rules. It's sometimes they tell you that don't leave your baggage unattended to. Don't collect baggage from somebody else, because sometimes you might have drugs in that baggage. When it comes to a ship, what are the rules? Now, I want to quickly take you through our investigation procedure. Investigation is the action of investigating something or a person. And from the NDLEA perspective, we work with intelligence. And when we get our intelligence, we'll process that intelligence. Processing involves watching out the time when the vessel will arrive, the place where it's going to berth, the number of crews, and then we prepare ourselves, specific location, are we using sniffer dogs? I will refer to the case of the MV Sparskopio in 2021. That was the eye-opener for NDLEA, because it took us a very, very rigorous time doing that investigation. In fact, we have never done an investigation so tedious as what we had in MV Sparskopio. And during that investigation, the drugs was hidden in the hatch, and it was in the bag. But we had to do things like forensic analysis, the CCTV footage cameras, checking all those things were not easy. Like you've heard, the sentence is life imprisonment. So you have to be careful with what your judgment is going to be while investigating. And at the end of the day, you have to try to narrow down to the crew members who was on duty when the supposed drugs was hidden. It depends on where it was found. We have to look at all those people that were on duty along that axis where the drugs was found. And we have to try to narrow down. How do you narrow it down? In some cases, like the lawyer said, we have language barriers. We have to get interpreters to interpret so that they can understand what you are saying. And at the end of the day, when you narrow down, we have to go through forensic analysis of the phone. And in sparse copio, we found out in one of the crew's phone some details that were in that phone about the drugs. In fact, when we now got to the crane driver, they sent him the picture of the bag that was carrying the drugs that he was supposed to pick. And mind you, in the case of sparse copio, the bag was concealed among the sugar. So we had to wait while they were discharging, watching, till we could see the bag coming up. And by the further investigation of those crane drivers, we found out that that was not even the first time that drugs have been passing through using that kind of mode of concealment. What am I trying to say in this? I really appreciate the presentation of Captain, but there's no how that drugs will move without having a syndicate, either among the crew, among the officers, among the ground workers, and the receivers. There's always a link. In fact, our financial investigation located some people who were residents outside the country connected to the drugs. So investigation is something that is very wide, and you have to be very, very careful because you are dealing with human beings and you cannot just sentence somebody to life imprisonment. The lawyer has already told you about our laws. The NDLA Entity Laws of the Federation 2004, Section 11A says, any person who without lawful authority imports, manufactures, produces, process plants, or grow the drugs popularly known as cocaine, LSD, heroin, or any other similar drug shall be of an offense and liable to conviction to be sentenced to imprisonment for life. And also, when we come to the vessel, you see, everybody has to be security conscious. Even in your homes, you are security conscious. You put your CCTV cameras there to watch out what is happening. Equally, we should get security conscious with the vessels too, and those handling the vessels and those that owns the vessels. Now, for the carrier, when you get to the section 25 of the Act, it says it ensures that the means of transportation are not used for the commission of an offense. The moment drugs is detected, there's already a criminal act that has been committed. And so it gives rise to the investigation. Now, after all the forensics, we now do a compilation of case files to ascertain the guilty parties, who is culpable among the crew members. After that, we now charge to court. Of course, there's usually application for bail. NDLA will always oppose, but the court will grant the bail on condition that they don't leave the country until the conclusion of the case. The vessel is also made to enter into a bond. Then trial commences. The court determines the length of period the matter will be concluded. Now, what is the way forward? I was so moved by the presentation of Captain about the captain that was jailed for 2 years. And then the one that Alhaji Alao talks about, of the person that they put gun on the head and the syndicate gave him drugs. In such cases, you can share intelligence. I'm sure we have a CSO on board of each vessel, or even with the captain. And thank God for this kind of a forum. You have connections with NDLA already. Once we get the intelligence, the person will be covered. No matter what it is, even if the drug gets to Nigeria, we know how to go about the investigation. Also, it is time for sensitization. I want to appreciate the organizers. This is the beginning. You need to do more, because ignorance is not a problem now in this matter. You got to be conscious, you got to know about what you are doing. Like now, Nigeria is a transit country. We have the producing countries and we have the consuming countries. And for each country, there is a law. And the ship owners, the captains of the vessels must understand the law of each country. Because if you have to enter a country, you must know what is obtainable in that country. And I would look at a situation where the drug abuse education will be incorporated into the curriculum of the seafarers. There's need to have knowledge. A lot of people don't even know how the drugs look like. Some look like powder, some look like leaf, some look like tablets. We must try to know. We must have the knowledge. Even for everyone that is seated here, because we even have our children there abusing drugs here and there. We must try to know what drugs is all about. We must get that knowledge. And so we should try to incorporate it into the school curriculum. And then we should have regular drug testing for seafarers. Yeah, all of them might be okay, but there will always be a Judas. There will always be one of them that works with the syndicate, because they have to watch out for their drugs. If they put the drugs in anywhere on the vessel, there will be one person to watch over to ensure that it gets to that country it's going. Another person will be on ground to watch over that bag to ensure that it gets to the destination that that drugs is going to. So it's a link. We always have people at one point or the other. It could even, we will even have security officers too that will be waiting to ensure the passage of that drugs to get out into the circulation. So we need sometimes to have the drug testing for the seafarers to ensure that the seafarers you have on board are not drug addicts. We need to have regular awareness and advocacies. Ship owners should ensure that such happen so that you can gain more knowledge about what drugs is all about. And also, I think the captain mentioned this in his presentation, ship owners should ensure that sailors put in place proper supervision, inspection, proactive measures, sealing and securing compartments of vessels before sailing. And I think we should start looking at having a rehabilitation center, because drug addiction is not an offense. It's a sickness. And we must find a way of rehabilitating those that are hooked on the drugs and bringing them back into the society. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Madam. You all agree with me that it's all starting to come together. If you were wondering why this topic, now you're starting to see the reason why this topic. And Madam, you talked about intelligence, and you agree with me that one agency working on its own does not have access to all the information. Captain Moran did describe how a vessel was seen in Ghana and there was the immediate transfer of information. They got the information, and by the time the vessel arrived in Nigeria, they were already ready to go in there. So it means that really intelligence is key, but most importantly, collaboration. And collaboration also with the use of technology so that there is quick transfer of information, and in carrying out your investigation, you don't have to go around the whole ship. I think Suresh used buildings to describe the size of a vessel. So with intelligence, you just go direct to the point, get what you need to, get the right information, and have a case proper. Because again, life imprisonment is such a huge punishment that you don't want your investigation to be shabby. So we understand why investigations take long. However, with right collaboration, use of technology and intelligence, it can be done faster. And I think it varied from even looking at it from the industry perspective to individuals as human beings. You talked about even from the family perspective, security consciousness is very important in the times that we're living today. And also, one key information is that Nigeria is a transit country. So we don't originate it. We are not the end users, but we're a transit route. And that then means we have the right to stop it. And you then appreciate the role we play in the global fight against drug smuggling and all. Because if we're able to stop it, then they will go elsewhere. But we hope that through our efforts, most transit routes will be stopped.
From Madam, then we'll have you.
Thank you. There's something called controlled delivery in NDLA. That's why we need to do a lot of collaboration together in the maritime. Because if there's nobody that is guilty on board and everybody is innocent, there's a system that is put in place that they will allow that drug to remain where it is. Either they put a counterfeit drugs there, or they put the real drugs there and allow it to move. Because the essence of the whole thing is to be able to get who is going to be the receiver of that drugs. So if we collaborate to a level, it's possible people on board, the captain and the crew members are trained in that area, that a controlled delivery can be done and it could get to the receiver and the receiver will be picked. There's no legal implication for doing that. In fact, we will thank them for what they have done. They have collaborated with us. They have helped NDLA. Thank you.
Thank you. So obviously there is...
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Cynthia Owo. So my question or my comment is directed at Captain Suraj. So I think that there is kind of like a disconnect between your first presentation, because the message behind the first presentation had been that, you know, seafarers, they leave their homes, they are on the seas, and in addition to the various tasks that they have to perform on the vessels, they are now kind of like tasked with probably being security conscious, especially on these drug issues. However, with the conversations from the NDLA, they kind of seem to be thinking that with the way the drug thing runs, the syndicates, that there's no way it can happen without the seafarers on the vessels. So I want to know your own personal opinion. Why do you think that when a drug is found on a vessel, why is the master and the crew the very first people to be held, apprehended, and prosecuted? You know, even though when, you know, all federal agencies know that maybe not these cartels. I mean, you gave an example of one cartel that had like 40,000 members, right? So if the federal agencies know that all these drugs are handled by the cartels, why do you think seafarers are like the very first people, the first point of contact to like hold down and prosecute when something like this happens? Thank you.
Yes. Yeah, thanks for the question. In my opinion,
from what we know, majority of the cases, seafarers have no indication whatsoever what's happening. Despite the fact that we put on extra security protocols, we still find there have been cases in the past in places like Mexico and Brazil. We used to use port security guards. We stopped doing that now because many times they themselves were involved. At the gangway, they themselves were helping people on. So now, as times have moved on, the techniques being used by these drug cartels is more and more sophisticated. As NDLA director just pointed out, there's a strong link between cartels and maybe port officials and associated people. Now, seafarers typically, when you say that, some people say they're from poor countries and they can be easily bribed, but that might have been the case some years ago. Recently, over the last few years, they are reasonably well paid, and they know the implications, far-reaching implications of being involved in this sort of drugs. Somebody pays them $3,000 or $5,000 or even $10,000. It's not worth it. It's not worth risking their lives for it. So there are cases where, under complete duress, as many of you would have heard or read about the Mediterranean shipping company ship called the Guyane in 2017, 18, 19, around that region. There was a lot, the ship was trading to the US, and the crew were from Montenegro and Azerbaijan. These crews and their families were held pretty much at hostage to turn a blind eye to when the ships were going into the US from South America. And eventually the FBI caught up with them. And you can read up on it anyway, it's in the net. FBI caught up with them, and the cartels were busted. And some crew members were implicated. By and large, most of them were innocent and released because they did it under duress. But that happens few and far between, okay? So when drug agencies like NDLEA think that there's no way the drugs can come on board without the seafarer's knowledge, I beg to differ with that, because it's very common for that to happen by numerous means, whether it's by mixing with the cargo, coming through the conveyor belt, because when a cargo is coming through conveyor belts, it's shooting down, and you cannot see, it works 24 hours, you cannot see some bricks or a bag falling through, it gets covered by other cargo, like it happened in the first 3 ships here. You know, loading is very fast. The Scorpio and the China Nari and the Kateria, 3 ships, it all happened through conveyor belts. You know, there's no way crew could have ever seen that. So, you know, so it is very difficult. There are cases also, because in a place like Santos, the channel itself is only 400 meters. The ship is close to about 180 meters. Across the channel, there's 24-hour boat traffic ferrying people. Across the other side is a place called Garucha, which is very, very poor. And that's where a lot of these drug operatives operate out of. And they bring these boats and at night bring it along ships and torpedo it down. So I honestly beg to differ with that ship's crew are always involved. I sincerely do believe they are not.
Thank you very much, Captain Suresh. I think that's a very important point to note. That, okay, ma'am. And thank you, Cynthia, for that question while we ask.
One thing we are not looking at are the dock workers, those that drive the cranes, those that handle the machines. They play a lot of role in what we're talking about. They play a lot of role. But it's high time for the masters and the captains and seafarers to be security conscious, to be able to secure the ship. They have that mandate to ensure that their vessel is secured and is not carrying drugs. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. So, okay, you're reacting to this, right? Okay, let's have him. We should be rounding up.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon.
My name is Andre Okunta. Okay, one thing we've all said here is that we need to collaborate. you know, from the maritime security perspective, we all know that, you know, we work according to the tenets of the ISPS code, Declaration of Security. Mr. Emmanuel here has mentioned that there's a need to collaborate. Several other people have said that here. What I would like to know, how is that going to happen? What framework are we going to adopt to ensure that that happens? Because so many times we've had talks like this and nothing, you know, happens. I don't know, should I throw this to the...
I think we should hear if there is any form of collaboration that your company, Captain Suresh, has been involved in, and how broad is that network, so that we may be able to look at a model.
Okay, sorry, I believe I've made my point.
Thank you.
You know, in every incident we've had, I mean, we had two big ones, one in Honduras and one here. In every incident, we have involved the international community. And ICS in London have been very helpful. There's a Secretary General there called Guy Platten. He's been helping us in every incident. Now, we collaborate with the ICS, the ILO, the local authorities, and the Hong Kong Shipowners Association, the Hong Kong Marine Department, because all our ships are Hong Kong flag. And in some cases with the Chinese government, and now with the Philippines government. In fact, in the seminar, there were some people to the Philippines consulate who were here. They're logging in from Abuja. They're watching this as well, because some of the crews have been involved. They've been detained. So we do widely collaborate. But when investigations start, it's very difficult to start collaborating with the people doing the investigations, you know, because it's a conflict of interest. Like in Honduras, certainly we were not trying to collaborate with the people concerned, but then the pressures and the education involved by international communities have made the Honduran authorities change the method of, you know, detecting drugs and detaining crews. They stopped doing that. Mexico is the same. So that seems to be the protocol globally, especially when drugs are becoming in from high-risk areas. So our collaboration has not so far been with enforcement agencies, because sometimes they are investigating an incident where we are at the other end of it.
All right, thank you. Let's have Mary Ann then.